My uncle mocked my little delivery gigs at my cousin's engagement party, completely unaware that I was the CEO of the logistics firm his future son-in-law was desperate to sign with. When the truth surfaced, their laughter died instantly. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The fluorescent lights of the urgent care waiting room were buzzing with a frequency that seemed to vibrate right through my skull. I was sitting on the edge of the paper-lined exam table, clutching my side, waiting for the doctor to come back with the results of the scan. I had been working 80-hour weeks for 3 years straight, pushing my body through caffeine, adrenaline, and sheer will, and today it had finally decided to push back. I was exhausted, dehydrated, and terrified that the sharp pain in my abdomen was something that would force me to step away from the helm of my company just as we were approaching the most critical merger in our history. In that moment of pure physical vulnerability, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a client, and it wasn't my assistant. It was a notification from the Family Updates group chat, a digital space I usually kept muted for my own mental health. I opened it, hoping for a distraction from the pain. What I found instead was a video file sent by my Uncle Sebastian. The caption read, "A toast to the ones who actually made something of themselves." I shouldn't have clicked it, I knew better. But I was alone in a cold medical room, feeling small and fragile, and some pathetic part of me still craved connection. I pressed play. The video was shaky, evidently filmed on a phone at what looked like a lavish dinner. My cousin, Claire, was sitting at the head of the table, beaming, her hand raised to show off a diamond ring that caught the candlelight aggressively. Uncle Sebastian was standing next to her, a glass of champagne in his hand, his face flushed with wine and arrogance. "To Claire," Sebastian bellowed in the video, his voice booming over the chatter, "who has secured not just a brilliant fiancé, but a brilliant future. Unlike some in this family who are still running around town dropping off cardboard boxes, Claire understands that success is about status." The table erupted in laughter. I watched, my thumb hovering over the screen, as the camera panned to show my aunt and several other relatives laughing along. "Seriously, though," Sebastian continued, grinning at the camera as if he knew I would be watching. "I asked Caroline if she wanted to contribute to the catering bill for the engagement party next week, and she said things were tight at the moment. Can you imagine? 32 years old and still claiming poverty because those little delivery gigs don't pay the bills." Claire giggled, taking a sip of her wine. "Dad, stop. It's not her fault she doesn't have the aptitude for the corporate world. Some people are just meant to be the help." "Exactly," Sebastian roared. "So, here's to Claire, who will never have to lift a box in her life." The video ended. I sat there, the silence of the exam room rushing back in to fill the void left by their laughter. The pain in my side was sudden and sharp, but it was nothing compared to the hollow ache spreading through my chest. I had just wired Uncle Sebastian $5,000 last week, money he claimed he needed for emergency home repairs. He had taken my money, the fruit of those delivery gigs, and used it to throw a dinner where he mocked me for being poor. I looked at the timestamp. They were eating dinner right now. They were laughing right now. And I was here, scared and alone, realizing that the people I had been trying to impress my entire life didn't just pity me, they actively despised me. The door opened and the doctor walked in, looking grim, but I barely heard him. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The diagnosis turned out to be severe exhaustion and a stress-induced ulcer. The doctor prescribed medication, rest, and a strict reduction in stress levels. "You cannot keep burning the candle at both ends, Caroline," he had said, looking at me with genuine concern. "Whatever you're building, it's not worth dying for." I nodded, agreeing with him in the moment, but as I walked out to my car, a modest 4-year-old sedan that I kept specifically to avoid drawing attention. My mind wasn't on my health. It was on that video. It was on the $5,000. It was on the lifetime of sneers and backhanded compliments. I drove home in a daze. My apartment was quiet, a stark contrast to the raucous dinner party I had witnessed on my SCR. I didn't live in a mansion, though I could have bought the entire block my uncle lived on. I lived in a comfortable, secure high-rise downtown, close to the headquarters of Vertex Logistics. I sat on my couch, the bottle of pills in one hand and my phone in the other. The group chat was still active. They were discussing the upcoming engagement party, the main event happening this Saturday. Uncle Sebastian, make sure everyone is on time. Jason's partners are coming. We need to look impeccable. No casual wear. And for God's sake, someone tell Caroline to dress like an adult, not a courier. Claire, I invited her, Dad, but honestly, I hope she doesn't come. It's going to be awkward introducing Jason to her. What are we supposed to say she does? She drives a van. Uncle Sebastian, just tell Jason she's in transportation. He'll assume she drives a bus. It's better than the truth. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, a mix of shame and fury. They truly had no idea. For 7 years, I had carefully curated a barrier between my professional life and my personal life. When I started Vertex, I was driving the truck myself. I was loading pallets at 4:00 a.m. I was the dispatch, the accounting department, and the janitor. Back then, their mockery hurt because it was true, I was struggling. But Vertex wasn't a delivery gig anymore. It was a supply chain solution for 3 of the largest e-commerce retailers in the country. We had a fleet of 400 trucks, 2 cargo planes, and massive distribution centers in 6 states. I wasn't driving the van, I was steering a $200 million ship. I had kept it quiet because I knew them. I knew that if Sebastian found out, the mockery would turn into begging. The insults would turn into entitlement. I wanted to be loved for me, not for my net worth. But reading their texts, seeing how easily they dismissed my existence while spending my money, something inside me snapped. The sadness that had weighed me down in the hospital room began to harden into something cold and heavy, like a stone settling in my gut. I typed a reply, my fingers trembling slightly. I'll be there. And don't worry, Uncle Sebastian, I'll dress appropriately. I hit send. I set the phone down and walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline. I could see the blinking red light of a plane in the distance, descending toward the airport. It was likely one of mine, a Vertex cargo jet, carrying tons of goods that kept the economy moving. They thought I was the help. They thought I was a joke. They thought they could take my money in private and humiliate me in public without consequence. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand why their words cut so deep, you have to understand the history. After my parents died when I was 22, Uncle Sebastian became the patriarch of the family by default. He didn't take me in, I was already an adult, but he took over the narrative of our family. Sebastian was a man who believed that appearances were the only currency that mattered. He was a mid-level manager at a bank, a job he held onto with a white-knuckled grip while projecting the image of a high-rolling financier. He leased luxury cars he couldn't afford, wore knockoff designer watches, and spoke loudly to waiters to assert dominance. When I used my small inheritance to buy a used box truck instead of finishing my master's degree, Sebastian looked at me like I had smeared mud on the family crest. Manual labor is for people who lack intellect, Caroline, he had told me at a Christmas party, loudly enough for his friends to hear. You're embarrassing us. You look like a trucker. I swallowed the insult then, just as I had swallowed hundreds of others over the years. I worked 18-hour days. I missed birthdays, weddings, and holidays because if I didn't drive the route, the contract would be void. I sacrificed my 20s to build something real, something that produced value, while Sebastian spent his 40s leveraging credit to maintain an illusion. Over the years, as Vertex grew, I stayed silent. When I bought my first warehouse, I told them I was renting a storage unit. When I hired my first 100 employees, I told them I was working with a team. I downplayed everything. I did it partly to avoid their greed, but partly because I kept hoping that one day they would be proud of me, the person, simply for working hard. I was wrong. Uncle Sebastian didn't value hard work, he valued leverage. I spent the next 2 days recovering, drinking water, and working remotely from my home office. I had my assistant, Mark, run a background check on the venue for the engagement party and, more importantly, on the guest list. "You want a dossier on your cousin's fiancé?" Mark asked over the phone, his voice tinged with confusion. "Yes," I said, my voice raspy but firm. "His name is Jason. I don't have a last name, but he's a corporate attorney." "Why, likely high level if Sebastian is bragging this much. He's in town for the engagement." "On it," Mark said. 2 hours later, an email landed in my inbox. Subject, Jason Miller/Miller and Associates. I opened the file. Jason Miller, Senior Partner, specializing in corporate mergers and acquisitions. My heart skipped a beat. The name was familiar, too familiar. I quickly opened my work laptop and pulled up the pending contracts for the acquisition of Bluestream Logistics, a smaller competitor we were absorbing to expand our West Coast operations. The legal firm representing Bluestream was Miller and Associates. I scrolled down to the signature page of the preliminary agreement. There it was, Jason Miller. I sat back in my chair, the realization washing over me like ice water. My cousin Claire was marrying the man who was currently begging my legal team to approve a buyout that would save his client from bankruptcy. Jason Miller wasn't just a lawyer. His entire year-end bonus, and likely his standing in the firm, hinged on closing the Vertex deal. And then I looked at the photo attached to Mark's email. Jason Miller, clean-cut, expensive suit, winning smile. I looked at a second photo Mark had found on social media. It was Jason standing with Uncle Sebastian on a golf course. Sebastian was wearing a polo shirt that was too tight, his arm around Jason, beaming with that predatory, desperate pride. Sebastian wasn't just happy for Claire. He was happy because he thought he had finally secured a connection to real money. He was likely already pitching Jason on investment opportunities or asking for loans. I closed the laptop. The pieces were falling into place. Sebastian had spent years mocking me for being a delivery girl, yet the very wealth he was so desperate to touch was sitting in my bank account, and the man he was pinning his hopes on was technically working for me. The irony was sickening, but it was also powerful. I stood up and walked to my closet. I pushed aside the hoodies and jeans I usually wore around them. In the back, protected by a garment bag, was a dress I had bought for the cover shoot of Supply Chain Weekly last month. It was elegant, sharp, and undeniably expensive. I wasn't going to the party to make a scene. I wasn't going to scream or shout. I was going to do exactly what Uncle Sebastian wanted. I was going to introduce myself to the new family member. I just wondered if Jason would recognize the name on the contract before or after Uncle Sebastian tried to humiliate me again. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy, humid heat that clung to the city like a second skin. I stood in front of my full-length mirror, smoothing the fabric of the midnight blue dress I had chosen. It was structured, architectural, and projected an air of authority that I usually reserved for boardrooms and shareholder meetings. For the first time in years, I wasn't dressing to blend in or to appear humble for my family's comfort. I was dressing as the CEO of Vertex Logistics. I fastened a simple platinum necklace around my throat, a gift to myself after we closed the Amazon partnership last year, and checked my reflection. The tired, pale woman from the urgent care clinic was gone. In her place stood someone cold, calculated, and ready. My phone buzzed on the vanity. It was Mark. "Caroline," his voice was clipped, professional. "I have the additional financial details you asked for regarding your uncle. It's bold." "Tell me," I said, putting on my earrings. "He's not just broke, Caroline. He's leveraged to the hilt. He's taken out a second mortgage on his house and he has 3 maxed-out credit cards. But here's the kicker. On his application for a recent personal loan, which was denied, by the way, he listed himself as a silent partner in a logistics firm. He didn't name Vertex explicitly, likely to avoid a direct fraud charge if caught, but he's implying to creditors that he has equity in your business. I froze, my hand hovering over my clutch. He's claiming he owns part of my company. Implied ownership, Mark corrected. He's using your success as collateral for his debts. And regarding the fiancé, Jason Miller, I did some digging into the Miller and Associates merger deal. It turns out Jason has been bragging to his partners that he's marrying into a prominent business family. He thinks Sebastian is a wealthy patriarch. If Sebastian is exposed as a fraud, Jason looks like an idiot to his firm. His professional credibility is tied to this marriage, looking like a power move. Thank you, Mark, I said, a dark smile touching my lips. That's exactly what I needed. I hung up and walked to the elevator. The trap wasn't just set, it was baited with their own lies. Sebastian wasn't just mocking me to feel superior, he was mocking me to keep me down, to ensure I never realized that he was the one riding on my coattails, even if only in his delusions to the bank. I drove my sedan to the venue, a pretentious, marble-columned country club on the north side of the city. Valet parking was mandatory. When I pulled up, the young attendant looked at my 4-year-old Honda with a sneer that perfectly mirrored my uncle's. Delivery entrance is around the back, miss, he said, barely looking up from his podium. I rolled down the window, the AC blasting cold air against the humid night. I'm a guest, keep it close. I handed him a $100 bill. His eyes widened and his posture straightened instantly. Yes, ma'am, right away. Money, it was the only language this world understood. I walked up the grand staircase, the sound of my heels clicking sharply against the stone. The double doors were open, spilling golden light and the sound of a string quartet onto the patio. I paused at the threshold, taking a deep breath. Inside, I could see them. Sebastian was holding court near the bar, looking flushed and boisterous. Claire was showing off her ring to a circle of women who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. I stepped inside. The reaction was a slow ripple. It started with the people nearest the door, who stopped talking to look at the woman in the midnight blue dress. Then it spread. I saw my Aunt Linda squinting at me, her glass of Chardonnay paused halfway to her mouth. She nudged Sebastian. Sebastian turned. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine confusion, before his default setting of arrogance slammed back into place. He excused himself from his group and waddled over to me, his tuxedo straining at the buttons. Caroline, he said, his voice booming. He didn't hug me, he didn't kiss my cheek. He looked me up and down, his eyes landing on the dress with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. Well, look at you. Did you blow your entire tax refund on a dress rental? He laughed, looking around to ensure his audience was appreciative. A few sycophants chuckled nervously. Hello, Uncle Sebastian, I said calmly. My voice was steady, devoid of the defensiveness he was used to. The venue is lovely. It is, isn't it? He puffed out his chest. Only the best for Claire. We're expecting Jason any minute. He's wrapping up a call with a major client. Big league stuff, Caroline. You wouldn't understand the pressure of that world. It's not like missing a delivery window because of traffic. He smirked, waiting for me to snap, to cry, to leave. I can imagine, I said simply. I'm sure Jason works very hard. He does, Sebastian sneered. Now, try not to embarrass us. Go get a drink, and stay in the back. We have important people coming. I watched him walk away, feeling a strange sense of detachment. He was digging his own grave with every word, and he didn't even know I was holding the shovel. The party was in full swing. The room was filled with the clinking of crystal and the low hum of conversation that prioritized networking over connection. I stood near a pillar, sipping sparkling water, watching the performance. Uncle Sebastian was in his element. He was the center of attention, telling a story that seemed to be growing more elaborate by the minute. He had gathered a large crowd, mostly Jason's friends and colleagues who had arrived early, and was holding court. "Hard work," Sebastian shouted, raising his glass. "That's the key. I taught Claire everything she knows. In this family, we don't settle for mediocrity. We strive for excellence." He paused, his eyes scanning the room until they locked on me. He needed a prop. He needed a counterexample to make his own success shine brighter. "Well," he corrected himself, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "Most of us do. Some of us are still finding our way, right, Caroline?" The room went quiet. 30 pairs of eyes turned to me. "I was just telling Jason's partners here," Sebastian continued, gesturing to a group of men in sharp suits, "that my niece Caroline here is the backbone of the local economy. She drives a delivery van. Can you believe it? 32 and still doing those little delivery gigs. Hustling packages for tips." The crowd chuckled. It was an uncomfortable, pitying sound. "Hey, someone has to bring me my Amazon packages, right?" one of Jason's friends joked, nudging his neighbor. "Exactly," Sebastian laughed, emboldened. "Still doing those little delivery gigs. I asked her last week, 'Caroline, when are you going to get a real job?' And she just looked at me. No ambition. But hey, at least she showed up in a nice dress. Probably cost a month's worth of tips." I didn't respond. I didn't look down. I simply held his gaze, my expression completely neutral. I took a slow sip of my water. The silence stretched. My lack of reaction was ruining his punchline. He wanted me to be flustered. He wanted me to be the blushing, ashamed, poor relation. By doing nothing, I was taking the oxygen out of his fire. "Well," Sebastian sputtered, trying to recover the momentum. "Anyway, to Claire." "To Claire," the room mumbled, turning away from the awkwardness. At that exact moment, the double doors at the entrance swung open. Jason Miller walked in. He looked exactly like his photos, polished, handsome, and radiating the frantic energy of a man who had been working on a Saturday night. He was on his phone, looking down at a document in his hand, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Honey," Claire shrieked, running over to him, "you made it." Jason looked up, forcing a smile. He pocketed his phone and embraced Claire, but his eyes were distracted. He scanned the room, nodding at his colleagues, performing the necessary social rituals. Then, his eyes swept past the pillar where I was standing. He stopped. His gaze snapped back to me. He blinked once, twice. His smile vanished. He went completely silent. It wasn't just a pause, it was a total system freeze. He looked from me to the crowd, to Sebastian, and back to me. I tilted my head slightly and raised my glass of water in a subtle, acknowledging toast. Jason's face drained of color. He looked like he had seen a ghost, or perhaps his own career flashing before his eyes. "Jason," Claire asked, pulling on his arm, "is everything okay?" Jason ignored her. He walked, almost marched, straight toward Uncle Sebastian, who was beaming, oblivious to the shift in atmospheric pressure. "Sebastian," Jason said, his voice low and urgent, "we need to talk." "Jason, my boy," Sebastian slapped him on the back. "Relax, get a drink, I was just telling the guys about." "Now," Jason hissed, the authority in his voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Kitchen, now." Sebastian blinked, confused by the tone. Sure, is something wrong?" Jason didn't answer. He grabbed Sebastian's elbow with a grip that looked painful and steered him forcefully toward the swinging doors of the kitchen. The room went dead silent. The string quartet stopped playing. Claire stood alone in the center of the room, looking confused and embarrassed. Everyone turned to look at me, the woman Jason had stared at right before dragging the host away. I didn't move, I waited. 10 minutes passed, the murmurs in the room grew louder, speculative. "Who is she?" I heard someone whisper. "Is she an ex-girlfriend? Is there a lawsuit?" Then the kitchen doors swung open. Sebastian walked out first. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. His skin was gray, his shoulders slumped, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He walked unsteadily, like a man on the deck of a sinking ship. Jason followed him, looking furious and terrified at the same time. They stopped in front of the crowd. Sebastian looked at the floor. He couldn't bring himself to lift his head. Jason cleared his throat. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Then he looked at his colleagues, the men Sebastian had been entertaining. "I apologize for the interruption," Jason said, his voice tight. "There has been a misunderstanding." He nudged Sebastian. Sebastian looked up. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see arrogance. I saw pure, unadulterated fear. "Caroline," Sebastian croaked, his voice cracked. He couldn't finish the sentence. He just stood there, shaking. When they came back, no one would look at me. But it wasn't the "don't look at the poor girl" avoidance from before. It was the terrified, "don't make eye contact with the predator" avoidance. I set my glass down on a passing waiter's tray. The clink of the glass against the metal was the loudest sound in the room. The party attempted to resume, but the energy had been siphoned out of the room. The air was thick with tension. Guests were whispering in huddles, casting furtive glances in my direction. I remained where I was, an island of calm in a sea of rising panic. Claire, however, was not one to let her spotlight dim without a fight. She marched over to her father, who was now chugging a scotch at the bar with trembling hands. "Dad, what is going on?" she hissed, loud enough for me to hear from 10 feet away. "Why is Jason acting like that? Why are you acting like that? You're ruining my engagement party." Sebastian didn't answer. He just shook his head, staring into his drink. Jason appeared at my elbow. He didn't approach me casually. He approached me like one approaches a bomb they are trying to defuse. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice dropping to a respectful, almost subservient whisper. I had no idea. I honestly had no idea." "Hello, Jason," I said, turning to face him fully. "It's a pleasure to finally meet the man reviewing my West Coast acquisition contracts. I trust the due diligence is going well." He flinched. Yes, we are very excited about the merger. Vertex is. It's a phenomenal company, truly." He swallowed hard, sweat beading on his upper lip. "Look, about your uncle, about what he said. He seems to be are the impression that I deliver packages," I said smoothly. "I haven't corrected him. It seemed unkind to confuse him with complex business structures." "He knows now," Jason said grimly. "I explained to him exactly who you are. I explained that if he insults the CEO of Vertex Logistics one more time, my firm loses the biggest contract of the year, and I lose my job." "And what did he say to that?" I asked. "He tried to deny it," Jason said, shaking his head in disbelief. "He tried to tell me you were lying, that you were just a driver. I had to show him the SEC filings on my phone. I had to show him your photo on the Forbes website." "And yet," I said, glancing over at Sebastian, who was now being berated by Claire, "he still hasn't apologized." "He's in shock," Jason said quickly, trying to mediate. "He's terrified. Ms. Vance, please, this deal. It's my career. Don't let his stupidity derail the business relationship." I looked at Jason. He was decent, perhaps, but he was weak. He was marrying into a family of vipers because he thought they had status. "Business is business, Jason," I said coldly. "But family, that's personal, and Sebastian has made this very personal." At that moment, Claire stormed over. She had clearly extracted some version of the truth from her father, but being Claire, she had processed it through her own lens of entitlement. "Is it true?" she demanded, her hands on her hips. "Dad says you own some trucking company, and that you're threatening Jason's job." "Claire, stop," Jason warned, stepping between us. "No, I won't stop," Claire shrieked, her voice rising. The room went silent again. "She's been lying to us for years, pretending to be poor. Do you know how much money we spent on this party? Do you know how much Dad is stressed about money? And she's been sitting on a pile of cash the whole time, letting us struggle." I felt a cold laugh bubbling up in my chest. "Struggle?" I asked, stepping around Jason. "Claire, your father is drinking a $50 glass of scotch. You're wearing a dress that costs more than my first car. That's not struggling. That's drowning in debt to impress people you don't even like. We are family, Claire yelled, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. Family helps each other. You watched Dad stress about the mortgage last month. You watched him beg you for that $5,000 for repairs, which he used to pay the deposit on this venue. I interrupted, my voice cutting through hers like a knife. Claire froze. What? The $5,000, I repeated, projecting my voice so the entire room could hear. He told me his roof was leaking. He told me he was sleeping with buckets on his bed. I sent him the money because I didn't want him to live in squalor. But he didn't fix a roof, did he? He used my money, the money earned from my little delivery gigs, to pay the catering deposit for this party so he could stand here and mock me. The crowd gasped. I saw Aunt Linda cover her mouth. That's a lie, Sebastian roared, finally finding his voice. He pushed off the bar, stumbling toward us. She's lying, I never. I have the bank transfer receipt, Sebastian, I said, pulling my phone from my clutch. And I have the text messages where you begged for it. Do you want me to project them onto the wall? Or shall we discuss the loan application where you committed federal fraud by listing yourself as a partner in my company? Sebastian stopped dead in his tracks. His face went from red to a sickly white. Jason whipped around to face Sebastian. You what? Jason whispered. You listed yourself as a partner on a loan application. It was a misunderstanding, Sebastian stammered, backing away. I just meant, spiritually, as a mentor. That is fraud, Sebastian, Jason said, his voice trembling with rage. If that comes out, my firm does background checks on family for partnership tracks, if you committed fraud involving my client. Jason looked at me, then back at Sebastian. The realization hit him. The wealthy patriarch he thought he was aligning with was actually a liability that could destroy his legal career. You're not just broke, Jason said, his voice rising in horror. You're a criminal liability. Jason, please, Sebastian begged, reaching out a hand. It's just paperwork. We can fix it. Caroline can fix it. She has millions. She can just sign a paper saying I'm a consultant or something. He turned to me, his eyes wet with desperate, pathetic hope. Caroline, sweetie, you can do that, right? Just for the bank. It's no skin off your nose. You wouldn't let your uncle go to jail. You wouldn't ruin Claire's wedding. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had mocked me since I was 22. The man who called me a failure while spending my charity. The man who was now asking me to commit perjury to save his ego. Uncle Sebastian, I said softly, I think you've misunderstood something fundamental about my business. What? He breathed. I don't carry dead weight. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the ambient noise of the country club seemed to recede, leaving only the three of us standing in the center of the polished floor. Sebastian, broken and begging, Jason, horrified and calculating, and me, finally, visibly, in control. Sebastian's face crumpled. Caroline, please, don't do this, we're family. We were family when you made that video, I said, my voice steady but carrying to every corner of the room. We were family when you told your friends I was a failure. We were family when you took my money and laughed at me behind my back. I was joking, Sebastian wailed, his dignity completely gone. It was just a joke, a little ribbing, you know how I am. It wasn't a joke, Sebastian, it was contempt, I said. And frankly, I could handle the contempt. I handled it for 10 years, but fraud, dragging my company, my employees, my reputation into your financial mess. I turned to Jason. He was staring at Sebastian with a look of pure revulsion. Jason, I said, my legal team is already drafting a formal cease and desist regarding Sebastian's claims of ownership. We will be notifying the bank that the information on his application is false. I imagine they will want to speak with him very soon. No, Claire shrieked, lunging forward. She grabbed Jason's arm. Jason, stop her. She's ruining everything. Make her stop. Jason pulled his arm away from Claire as if she burned him. Stop her. Claire, your father committed fraud. He implicated my client. Do you have any idea what this does to me? If the partners find out I'm marrying into a family that is actively defrauding the companies I represent, I'm done. I'm disbarred. Claire stared at him, her mouth open. But the wedding. There is no wedding, Jason shouted, the veneer of the polite lawyer finally cracking. Look at this. Look at your father. He's broke. He's a liar. He's been playing me for a fool for 6 months, pretending to be some big-shot investor so I'd pay for dinners, for trips. He turned to Sebastian, his face red with fury. I paid for the engagement ring, didn't I? You said you'd wire me the half for the dowry next week. That money doesn't exist, does it? Sebastian looked down at his shoes, weeping silently. Does it exist? Jason screamed. No, Sebastian whispered. The sound of the word no hung in the air. Jason let out a short, hysterical laugh. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his car keys, and looked at Claire. I'm leaving, he said. Do not contact me. Do not come to my apartment. My assistant will be in touch regarding the return of the ring. Jason, Claire sobbed, reaching for him again. Don't, he snapped. He looked at me, his expression shifting to one of professional terror. Ms. Vance, Caroline, please know that Miller and Associates had no knowledge of this. I will handle this personally. I expect you will, Jason, I said coolly. I'll see you at the closing table on Monday, alone. He nodded, swallowed hard, and walked out of the room without looking back at his fiancée. Claire collapsed onto a chair, sobbing into her hands. Her friends, the bridesmaids who had sneered at me earlier, stood awkwardly, unsure whether to comfort her or flee the sinking ship. Sebastian stood alone in the center of the room. He looked small. The bluster, the arrogance, the booming voice, it was all gone. He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. Are you happy now? He whispered. You destroyed us, your own flesh and blood. I stepped closer to him. I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt a profound sense of closure. I didn't destroy you, Uncle Sebastian, I said, my voice soft enough that only he could hear. I just stopped paying for the costume you were wearing. I turned around and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one said a word. No one laughed. They just watched the woman in the midnight blue dress walk out of the room, leaving the wreckage of their illusions behind her. The fallout was swift and brutal, just as gravity always is. By Monday morning, the engagement was officially off. Jason Miller, in a desperate bid to save his career, had provided my legal team with every text and email Sebastian had ever sent him, painting a clear picture of the deception. It saved Jason's job, barely, but it buried Sebastian. The bank investigation was thorough. Faced with charges of loan fraud, Sebastian was forced to sell his house to avoid prosecution. The mansion on the hill, the symbol of his supposed success, was sold at a loss to cover his debts. He moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of town, ironically, not far from the first warehouse I had rented 10 years ago. Claire didn't speak to me for months. She blamed me for stealing her life, unable to accept that the life she thought she aged. Ad was built on a foundation of lies. She eventually moved to another state to start over, away from the whispers and the humiliation. As for me, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't celebrate their downfall. I just felt light. 3 months later, I sat in the conference room at Vertex headquarters. We had just signed the final papers for the Blue Stream acquisition. Jason was there, sitting on the opposite side of the table. He was quiet, respectful, and efficient. We didn't discuss the party. We didn't discuss his ex-fiancée. We discussed logistics, margins, and integration timelines. When the meeting ended and the lawyers were packing up, Jason lingered for a moment. Ms. Vance, he said. Jason, I replied, not looking up from my tablet. I just wanted to say, thank you, he said quietly. I looked up. For what? For stopping me, he said. I was marrying a mirage. It would have been a disaster. Yes, I said, it would have. I also wanted to ask, he hesitated. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Why let it go on so long? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the fleet of trucks lining up at the loading docks below. They were real. The concrete was real. The work was real. Because I needed to know if it was real, Jason, I said. I needed to know if the family I had was worth saving, or if they were just another bad investment. I turned back to him. And once I audited the books, I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. The answer was obvious. I walked out of the conference room and down the hall toward my office. My assistant, Mark, was waiting for me with a cup of coffee and the daily report. "Your aunt called again," Mark said, falling into step beside me. "She wants to know if you're coming to Thanksgiving this year." I took the coffee and took a sip. It was perfect. "Tell her I'm busy," I said. "I have some delivery gigs to run." Mark laughed. I laughed with him. And for the first time in a long time, the laughter didn't hurt. It felt like freedom.